most dangerous form of madness isn't the kind locked behind asylum walls. It's the kind that wears a suit, speaks at rallies, and calls itself common sense. In 1957, Carl Jung sat down and wrote one of the most unsettling psychological documents ever published, a book called The Undiscovered Self. 7 Stages Descent. In it, he mapped a precise sequence. 7 stages that any society moves through as it descends from civilization into collective insanity. And here's what makes this different from every other theory you've encountered. Jung wasn't describing ancient history. He was watching it happen in real time and issuing a warning. But near the end of that book, he wrote one specific prediction. Something so counterintuitive, so almost naive in its simplicity, that he nearly removed it before publication. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that prediction was. If you've ever looked at the world and felt that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong, a madness you could sense but could never quite name, stay until the final minute. This video was made for that feeling, because by the end, you will be able to place your society on Jung's map of collective descent, all 7 stages, right now. 7 stages. Let's start with a question almost nobody asks. What was Jung actually afraid of? By 1957, Carl Jung was 82 years old. He had spent 6 decades mapping the human unconscious, the shadow, the archetypes, the collective psyche. He had watched 2 world wars erupt not from foreign invasion, but from the depths of mass psychology. And what he saw in the post-war world didn't comfort him. It terrified him. The Undiscovered Self is a short book, barely 100 pages, but it carries the weight of a lifetime of hard observation. In it, Jung argues something deeply uncomfortable. The greatest threat to civilization is not a foreign enemy, but the unconscious mind of the citizen. Jung believed that when individuals stop doing the hard work of self-knowledge, stop confronting their own shadows, their own contradictions, their own capacity for evil, they become vulnerable, not to external forces, but to something far more insidious, what he called mass psychology. A state where the individual dissolves into the collective, surrenders their conscience to the crowd, and begins to act in ways they would never permit themselves alone. He called this process the descent into collective insanity, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens in 7 stages, and stage 1 is so quiet, so ordinary, that most people living through it never even notice it has begun. The first stage doesn't look like insanity at all. It looks like boredom. Jung called it the loss of symbolic life, the moment when individuals stop finding meaning in anything larger than themselves. No faith, no mythology, no shared story, no sense of belonging to something that transcends the daily grind. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Think about what it actually feels like to live without meaning. You wake up, you work, you consume, you scroll, you sleep, you repeat. And somewhere beneath the surface, a question starts to pulse. Is this it? Is this all there is? Jung saw this restlessness spreading through Western society in the mid-20th century. The churches were emptying. The old mythologies were being replaced by pure rationalism. Science could explain the how of everything, but the why was disappearing. A person without meaning is a person without roots. And here is what Jung understood that most people miss. A human being without roots doesn't just become unhappy, they become dangerous. Because a rootless person will accept almost anything that offers belonging, purpose, and an enemy to blame. This is where the descent begins, not with violence, with emptiness. Now, if this pattern is resonating with something you see in the world today, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. Because stage 2 is where things begin to get genuinely disturbing. Here's where the psychology turns dark. Stage 2 begins when a society in pain finds a name for what's wrong with it, and that name is always a person or a group. Jung called this projection, when we refuse to look at the darkness within ourselves. Our fear, our greed, our capacity for cruelty, we don't make it disappear. We throw it outward. We see it in other people. We attribute to them everything we cannot bear to admit about ourselves. Enemy projection, shadow. In stage 2, a society doesn't just dislike its scapegoat. It believes with full conviction that this group is the source of everything wrong. The economic problems, the cultural decay, the loss of values, the suffering. The enemy is never as real as the shadow that created them. Jung documented this mechanism in the rise of Nazism, in the Soviet purges, in every ideological movement that has ever needed a villain to justify its own existence. The terrifying thing is that this projection feels completely rational from the inside. The people engaging in it don't believe they're projecting. They believe they've simply identified the truth. The shadow doesn't know it's a shadow. And once the enemy is named, stage 3 arrives. and it demands something of everyone around it, something that seems like basic decency at first. But what stage 3 actually asks for is far more sophisticated than you think. Stage 3 is where the social pressure becomes impossible to ignore. Once a society has named its enemy, it begins to demand loyalty, and that demand doesn't arrive as an open threat at first. It arrives as social pressure, as a raised eyebrow when you ask the wrong question, as a silence that falls over a dinner table, as the subtle withdrawal of warmth from people you care about. Conform or disappear. Jung understood that human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to social acceptance. We evolved in small tribes where exclusion meant death. So when a society begins to punish doubt, even subtly, most people don't resist, they adjust. They stop asking questions publicly. They start performing agreement. They learn which thoughts are safe to voice and which must remain entirely private. The pressure to conform is the pressure to disappear. Solomon Asch demonstrated this in 1951 with his famous conformity experiments. When every other person in the room agreed that a clearly shorter line was the longest, 75% of subjects went along with the obvious lie. Just once, just to avoid standing out. Now multiply that across an entire culture, sustained over years. The individual must differentiate himself, and must do so as an act of will. In stage 3, the individual still exists, but they've gone underground, and stage 4 is what happens next, when even the inner voice begins to go quiet. This is the stage Hannah Arendt documented with absolute horror after the war. Stage 4 is the most psychologically devastating of them all, and the hardest to detect from the inside. This is the stage where individuals stop thinking for themselves not because they're forced to, but because they've forgotten how. Jung called this the loss of individual conscience. It's the moment when a person's internal moral compass becomes entirely externalized, when right and wrong are no longer determined from within, but downloaded from an authority, the state, the movement, the ideology, the algorithm. You still believe you're thinking, but the thoughts aren't yours anymore. This is fundamentally different from simple conformity. Conformity is knowing you disagree but staying quiet. Stage 4 is no longer even noticing that you disagree. The internal observer, what Jung called the self, becomes absorbed by the collective voice. Obedience becomes identity. Hannah Arendt documented this after World War II. She called it the banality of evil. The discovery that atrocities are committed not primarily by monsters, but by ordinary people who have outsourced their conscience to a system that pre-authorized the cruelty. The ordinary person becomes dangerous the moment they stop questioning. What makes stage 4 so insidious is that from the inside, it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like clarity, like finally knowing what to believe, like relief, and that profound relief, that feeling of certainty, is exactly the warning sign. Because stage 5 takes that certainty and weaponizes it into something Jung called possession. And possession makes stage 4 look mild. Jung had a specific word for what happens next, not radicalization, not extremism, he called it possession. In stage 5, the collective ideology doesn't just influence its members, it inhabits them. People don't hold the belief anymore, the belief holds them. Possessed. Jung borrowed this language from mythology deliberately. Possession, in ancient cultures, described a state where a person was no longer acting from their own will. They had become a vessel for something larger, something that spoke through them. And Jung saw the same dynamic playing out in modern political and ideological movements of the 20th century. The more the critical reason dominates, the more impoverished life becomes. When a person is ideologically possessed, they experience a paradox. They feel more certain, more purposeful, more free than ever before, while simultaneously becoming less capable of independent thought than they have ever been. The possessed feel liberated by their chains. Every contradiction in the ideology gets rationalized. Every piece of counter-evidence gets dismissed as enemy propaganda. Every doubt that arises, and doubt does arise even in the possessed, gets suppressed as weakness or betrayal. This is the stage where ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty, not because they are evil, because the framework they've surrendered to has pre-authorized that cruelty as necessary, as righteous, as sacred. Righteous cruelty normalized. And now the possessed need somewhere to direct all that certainty. Stage 6 is where societies stop debating and start hunting. Stage 6 is ancient. It may be the oldest mechanism in human civilization. The scapegoat ritual appears in every culture that has ever existed. In the Hebrew Bible, in Greek tragedy and Aztec ceremony, The French anthropologist René Girard spent his entire career arguing that scapegoating is the foundational act of social cohesion. A community in crisis selects a victim, someone marginal, different, already distrusted, and transfers all its collective anxiety onto that person or group. The scapegoat carries the sins the crowd refuses to see in itself. What makes Stage 6 different from Stage 2 projection is the organized, institutional nature of the persecution. In Stage 2, people dislike the enemy. In Stage 6, the system begins to process them. Laws are changed, rights are removed, definitions are redrawn, and those living in Stage 5 possession experience this not as injustice, but as justice finally being done. The persecution feels like healing to the people performing it. Jung watched this mechanism destroy Europe in the 1930s and 1940, and what horrified him most wasn't the perpetrators at the top. It was the ordinary people who participated, who watched, who simply didn't object, because silence in Stage 6 is not neutrality. Silence is permission, and the movement always interprets permission as an invitation to go further. Silence becomes complicity. Stage 7 is what silence eventually produces, and it is the stage Jung most desperately wanted to prevent, and also the one he believed was almost inevitable once Stage 6 had fully established itself. Stage 7 doesn't require a war to arrive. It doesn't require a massacre, a revolution, or a visible cataclysm. Stage 7 is simply the moment when a society can no longer distinguish between reality and the story it has been telling itself. Collapse. This is what Jung meant by collective psychosis. Not that everyone has gone clinically insane, but that the collective mind has become so organized around projection, possession, and scapegoating that it loses the capacity to self-correct. The feedback loops are gone. The circuit breakers have been systematically removed. The system can no longer see what it has become. Signs of Stage 7 are precise. Institutions that once served the individual begin to serve only themselves. Truth becomes a function of loyalty, not observation. Dissenters are not debated, they are eliminated. The line between critique and treason dissolves entirely. And here is the most chilling part of Jung's analysis. Stage 7 doesn't feel like madness from the inside. The people living through it believe they are in a period of extraordinary clarity. Finally, truth is being told. Finally, enemies are named. Finally, justice is being served. The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense. Every atrocity in history felt like justice to the people committing it. That is Stage 7, and if you've been mapping this against what you observe right now, a question is forming. The next segment answers it directly, honestly, and it may be the most important thing in this entire video. Here's what I need you to understand, and why this video needed to exist right now. Jung published The Undiscovered Self in 1957. He was watching the Cold War unfold. He was writing about the Soviet Union and about the unconscious dynamics of Western democracy. But if you read it today, if you actually sit with it page by page, the experience is uncanny, because every stage he described is visible. Right now, today, the loss of meaning, documented across every measure of loneliness, depression, and nihilism in the developed world. The projection of the enemy, you've watched it unfold in real time across every political spectrum. The demand for conformity, you felt the social cost of asking the wrong question. The silencing of individual conscience, you've watched people defend things they privately know are wrong, because the movement required it. We are not watching history, we are living a chapter of it. Ideological possession, scapegoating, the blurring of truth and loyalty. Jung's map is not a prediction anymore, it is a diagnosis. What stage are we in? That depends on who you ask, and the fact that we cannot agree on the answer might itself be the most important signal of all. Do you think society is already in Stage 5, or are we still in Stage 3? Comment Stage 3 or Stage 5. I genuinely want to know where you think we stand, and if this recognition has landed hard. If you're seeing Jung's map in the world around you, send this to anyone who needs to hear it today. Jung's warning was written for people who still have the capacity to receive it. They'll thank you for bringing it to them. But here's what Jung's warning ultimately contained. The thing almost no one discusses. The specific prediction he nearly removed before publication because he feared it would sound naive against the scale of the problem he had just described. The cure for collective insanity is individual sanity. Jung believed there was exactly one force capable of halting or reversing the descent through these 7 stages, not a political revolution, not a new ideology to replace the old one, not a stronger institution or a more enlightened leader. The individual. The individual. Specifically, the individual who does the inner work, who faces their own shadow, the rage, the envy, the fear, the capacity for cruelty, and integrates it rather than projects it outward onto others, who maintains the discipline of independent thought even when it costs them socially, who refuses to surrender their conscience to any movement, no matter how righteous it claims to be. The most important question a person can ask is, am I related to something infinite or not? This was Jung's prediction, that the future of civilization would be decided not by governments, not by armies, not by technology, but by whether enough individuals chose to become conscious, not collectively conscious, individually conscious. One person at a time. You are one person, but one conscious person creates ripples, and enough ripples, Jung believed with everything he had, can change the current of a river, even one that is already flowing toward the falls. In 1957, Carl Jung sat down and wrote a warning. He called it the Undiscovered Self. In it, he mapped 7 precise stages through which any society descends from civilization into collective madness. 1. Loss of meaning. 2. Creating the enemy. 3. Conformity demanded. 4. Conscience silenced. 5. Ideological possession. And then scapegoating, and finally collapse. The moment a society can no longer see what it has become. The descent Jung described is not inevitable, but it becomes inevitable the moment enough individuals stop doing the work of self-examination, stop confronting their own shadows, and outsource their conscience to a crowd. The map was drawn in 1957, and the territory looks familiar. Jung's deepest conviction was this: civilization is not maintained by institutions. It is maintained by conscious individuals, by people who insist on seeing themselves clearly, who refuse the comfort of projection, who resist the warmth of possession, who hold their own conscience even when holding it costs them everything. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. If you made it to the end of this video, you're one of those people, and Jung would have wanted you to know it. Comment Undiscovered Self below. It's the title of the book, the warning he left us. Claim it as your own commitment to stay conscious, even now, especially now. Welcome to the Psyche Project.